So I think I want to start off, just for anybody in the audience who may not have come across your work, give us a bit of a background to you.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted and so pleased to be here in Cork. And I was hearing about all the incredible things that are going on and being done for and with LGBTIQA people at the coming out session last night. And I said I was thinking of moving to Cork. So just to let you know, I may appear down here at some point or another. I am a campaigner, an activist. I have been a feminist, a socialist, and an LGBTIQ activist for a very long time. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a very proud lesbian. Well, I'm not proud to be lesbian because I am lesbian. I'm very pleased and very happy to be lesbian, but I'm very proud to be here and chatting with an old pal, Arthur, today.
So Arthur, kind of like Ailbhe there, give us a bit of background into your life and the work you do.
Well, my first coming out process says a lot about the rest of my life. In fact, it was in Dundalk. I worked in a factory there, and I got a badge which was the two symbols, and I put it on, and nobody commented. Though I was there for a week, and nobody commented on it. And I realized that at the end of the week, somebody said to me that recognized that I had the lesbian badge on. So I started off in life as a lesbian. And I've suffered a lot since. But that was in 1967, I think. I didn't spend too long as a lesbian in Dundalk. So I moved to England and worked mostly on, like a lot of Irish people at the time, worked on building sites and things like that for a number of years. And that wasn't a very gay-friendly kind of environment. And I went then, I think, to work on, I worked with, just very lucky in meeting singular people throughout. And that's a factor throughout my life. It is meeting individual people who've had enormous influence and I can talk on like this for everything. Ailbhe,
well, I was going to say, nobody asked you to tell your whole life story, but I mean, you're welcome if you want, but I'll have to do mine then as well. And we'll be here until next week between the two of us. So are you intervening now?
I'm going to intervene now, Ailbhe, because I feel like there's going to be a scrap if I don't. So listen, looking at the sea of faces out here, would either of you ever thought, Ailbhe, I'll go to you first, would you ever have thought in all your years that you'd be sitting here at a diversity and inclusion conference? Would you ever imagined this type of event back when you kind of first started your fight?
Well, they say that the past is another country, but it's certainly true, and I'm sure it is for Arthur too, where, the same vintage, you came out as a lesbian and one thing and another. A good bit before I did, actually. It was quite late. I think it was late 60s, 70s. For me, it was towards the end of the 80s. So but it's still, that is absolutely within living memory. And certainly, and I'm sure Arthur would be the same, I mean, the world that I came out into was a world that actually you couldn't come out into. And there was almost a sense in which no matter how hard you tried to say to people, I'm lesbian, they didn't actually want to hear that, so they actually didn't. And I used to do a fair bit of broadcasting on RTE radio, and they would say, well, how would you like to be introduced? And I was an academic in UCD at the time, and was indeed for 40 years, and that's another story. But I used to say, well, I'm a feminist and a lesbian activist, and they would put up on the screen or on the radio, UCD academic Ailbhe Smyth. And I would say, but I'm here to talk maybe about issues. So, that's just to make the point that today where people are confident and sitting here comfortably talking about issues that no way could we have spoken about them in public. And also, just, and I won't go on forever, Arthur, don't worry, but just to make the point that, I mean, there was a very real sense in which certainly when I came out towards, and that was sort of second half of the 1980s, and I was a seasoned feminist campaigner. I had been up against, and by the way, we're still up against the misogyny that there is in the world. I knew how tough it was out there and in the place I worked and in my social relationships. I knew it was really tough, but oh my God, I had absolutely no idea how hard it was to simply be lesbian and to say that. And it had very, I was afraid. I think that's what I'm actually trying to say. I really experienced fear that I was going to lose my job, that I would lose the support of my friends and my family, and it did have a big impact for me on my family life. I have a daughter who is currently raising my grandchildren, and I'm very happy and delighted about that. But my daughter went to live with her father, and not in Ireland. And there was no way I could challenge that decision, because to do so would have been in the mid-1980s, would have been very difficult for me, but it would have had an enormous impact on my daughter. So there was I think now if we heard of something, or when we do hear of this kind of situation happening, we're appalled and we're outraged. Lots of people knew what was happening with me and were very supportive, but nobody would speak out. Nobody. And I think that was true right across the board in so many ways.
Yes, I mean, one of from growing up in Ireland, that there was very little awareness of lesbians that gay men were it was all around, and there was a small number of lesbians, and that was it.
They were in Cork. Sorry. Just say it, okay?
Lesbians descended on Cork, that's what it was.
But and that's a situation that's changed enormously now today that there is, in Cork, there is a very vibrant lesbian community. And, I think when I came back to Cork, I was practically middle-aged. I was 40-something, 41 or something when I came back. So I had 20 years experience in London as an out gay person, working in a very closed kind of community. We worked in Railton Road in London, and maybe some people might have heard of it. It was a kind of a very, I knew all my friends. There was 20 of them, and that was the movement that you worked with. So coming back to Ireland in the 80s, and we started the Key Co-op, and that was a very radical statement in Cork at the time. And maybe most of the people here just see it now as a kind of cozy alternative shop, but at the time it was quite a radical space in the city. Mm-hmm. And it yeah, go on. I'm rambling again.
You've touched there on about how, back when you kind of came out and stuff like that, there was only a few lesbians, and so obviously the relationship between gay men and lesbians have changed over time. Am I right?
Yes, very definitely. And I mean, certainly when I came out first, but that was well into the 80s, obviously, there was no relationship effectively between gay men, or very, 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 very little. And there were sort of two separate kind of camps. And of course, the interesting thing was that we didn't have trans people in our sites at all at that time. And bisexuals was something we were actually talking about last night. Bisexuals got a hard time one way and another from both the lesbians and the gay men, and they were sort of somewhere there.
I think still do.
Still do, absolutely. And I think that there is a lot of
kind of the thing of,
biphobia.
would you hurry up and make up your mind, you know?
Yeah, but there is definitely something of that kind. But I mean, but that did begin to get itself sorted, and I think it happened maybe slightly differently in Dublin and Cork, as things happen to do, needless to mention. But in Dublin, it was there was a lot of trouble around the Hirschfield Centre at one stage, and then subsequently there was a group of gay men who actually approached a number of women, a number of lesbians, and asked us to become involved in doing sort of more developmental work. And I, at that point, became involved in the National Lesbian and Gay Federation, which published GCN and which still actually publishes GCN. And it was at that stage, that would have been towards the end of the 90s, I think, Arthur. Was it mid-90s? And it began to work much better. And now I would say that there really is a very seamless, a very, very seamless operation.
From your point of view, and I'll ask both this question. From your point of view, like, we're obviously sitting here amongst industry professionals in their field and within their companies. From what you've done and what you've gone through in both of your lives, what can these people sitting out here do to alleviate any battle that you may have fought, or you may have fought, Arthur? What can they do to help people in their workplace and in their lives around them do to feel more comfortable just to be themselves?
Well, certainly, I mean, from what I've heard this morning and from what I know of a number of companies and the development of EDI policies and the implementation of those policies, there is an enormous amount being done. But I think it's really important. For, and of course we do, to understand that companies exist in a whole society. So they're not just a little oasis, even if there are hundreds and thousands of workers in those companies. They exist in a whole society, and they exist in a society where there is still homophobia, there is lesbophobia, biphobia, transphobia, absolutely. And these things, it has hugely improved, we know that. But if you look at the extent to which young people in schools and colleges are still bullied and harassed, I mean, that is absolutely appalling. And I see Nikki nodding there as chair for a long time have belonged to, that work of challenging that has to go on. I think of the numerous communities in Ireland, many of them mentioned this morning already, where we talk about intersectionalities, but I'm thinking about communities which are, extremely reluctant to recognize. We talk, the traveller community, for example, is very, 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 still very difficult. People with disabilities are not really welcomed or spoken about. Welcome, that's the wrong word. Not spoken about and not attended to in the society as a whole, or in our LGBTIQA communities either. The pandemic showed up the isolation and the loneliness of so many older LGBTIQA people. I mean, that was very, very striking. We don't like to think it's a very young kind of community to be faced with two older than you people on the platform is in itself kind of interesting, I think, isn't it? We don't want to look at age, but we are also an aging community. And how much do we think about that? And what do we do? What do we care about what's happening to older LGBTIQs who may have had very difficult lives, where there's been a lot of stigma and discrimination, etc., etc.?
Arthur, Ava touches on a great point there, traveller community, bisexual community, trans community, and of course, an older generation of a community. Is there something we can do to help that process along, to make sure everybody is...
I forgot about your question. I'm sorry about
that's
that.
Okay,
I got off on a rant.
Listen, you rant away. You're Ailbhe Smyth. You can rant all you like, love. Is there more we can do to kind of broaden the horizons? Because we fought the right for the L, the G, the B, and partially the T, but there is so much more community-wide. What can we do to really include?
I think there is a thing that, we need to look outside of our own communities. The whole race thing in Ireland, I think, is a huge thing. And my experience in England was, at the outset, the first generation of people who came, they just settled quietly into and the kind of racist attitudes were permeated. But I think it is with the second generation coming on that there has to be, I mean, if you look out here now, it's a very, very white, exclusively almost white audience. And it is, you walk in Patrick Street and it is very different what you see. So I think that's one of the big areas. I think we have appalling record in terms of how we relate to travellers. I think in one of the one that really stands out. And there have been programs that have been implemented, and we still haven't challenged the really basic and what are often simple things to resolve. So I think there is a huge amount to be done, outside, but also within the own gay community. There is, it is. I think going right back when we set up the other place, which was in Gustin Street, and we had 35 people working on a CE scheme there, and we had, I think there was about 15 or 20 lesbians there, and there were 2/3 of them were from the university or a university background, and they were highly articulate and really frightened the life out of me. But they developed very quickly and moved on from there. So I'm getting...
Well, I was just thinking, just listening to you there and thinking that we're talking one of the panels, which is very interesting, about allyship, about being allies. And I was thinking it's really important for all those of us who see ourselves as part of that great multivarious LGBTIQA community, to be allies to others within our community. It's not just that those who are not in the community need to ally themselves with us, so to speak, that sense of being there as supports for everyone, whether it's on the basis of race or whether it's age or disability or class, because we still have issues of social class in this country, that we really have to think about that. And I would definitely say to all those who are working on those issues to constantly, be looking at the fact that your company it's not an island, it's not an oasis, it is part of something larger, and that you have a role in challenging, your company, your people have a role in challenging what is going on in the larger society that is counteracting and that is contradicting the work that we're all trying to do for equality and diversity and against marginalisation. Because, I do think, and actually, Micheál Martin said it himself this morning, pride is a protest. We are not beyond the politics. And I think sometimes we can kind of forget that when we hear of all the good things that are being done, that there is still so much we need to be challenging and that we need to be protesting about. Our trans march, for example, in Dublin was 2 weeks ago, and it was great. And there were, a few thousand people there, and you had a great trans rally here in Cork, I think it was last Saturday, which was great. But in both cases, I was surprised, certainly for Dublin, that we didn't see many more LGBs, LGBIs and whatnot out there along with the trans and intersex and gender non-conforming communities. We didn't see that. So why weren't we all there? Why weren't there as many there as for anything else? And I'm sure you would have been saying the same thing here in Cork. So, those are really important lessons for us to be learning.
As we're kind of wrapping up now, I think the biggest message you've kind of given us there is, and what you've said to the people out here is, challenge yourself, keep asking the right questions, and keep making sure that you're showing up.
No. you could go on challenging yourself. That's absolutely fine. I want to challenge what's out there and that isn't working. I do think, of course, we need to I think we need to look after ourselves and to take care of ourselves. Maybe that's a challenge for you. I'll give you lessons afterwards.
Thanks, Pat.
But we really need to challenge that world which is still so powerful, so that, LGBTs, etc., in Afghanistan, in Turkey, in Poland, in Hungary, in the US are in jeopardy and at risk. There's a whole world out there where there is an extreme right-wing movement which is bearing down on us as women in relation to abortion, and which is bearing down on all of us as lesbian, gay, bisexual, gender non-conforming, trans, intersex, and whatever you're having yourself. And it is coming for us, and we have to be there and stand up, whether we're in a company, a university, or just our little selves out there on the street. We have to stand up there and say, no, you don't, no further, and absolutely no surrender to that.
I love that.
I didn't mean to say that. Thank you. I don't know where it came from.
So, whilst I go get lessons about challenging myself, I want you to put your hands together. Absolute legends, activists, and all-round icons. Ailbhe Smyth and Patrick Leahy, everybody.